Welcome to the Cold Dead Heart Candlelit Mortuary, the podcast where the shadows come alive and unknown beckons. I'm your host, Gigi.
And I'm Jasper. Every week we journey into the heart of mysteries, ghosts, monsters, and legends that have captivated and terrified humanity for centuries.
Join us every Friday as we uncover chilling tales of hauntings, explore cryptic encounters with otherworldly creatures, and delve into legends that blur the line between myth and reality.
From the eerie apparitions of long lost spirits to the unexplained phenomena to defy logic, we leave no stone unturned in our quest to illuminate the darkest corners of the unknown.
So light a candle, settle in, and prepare your journey into the macabre and mysterious.
Welcome to the Cold Dead Heart Candlelit Mortuary, where every story is a step closer to the unseen. Subscribe now and never miss an episode as we unravel the secrets that lie just beyond the veil.
Until then, stay curious and keep exploring.
Before we start off with our chosen topic, we're going to start each episode with a creepy story of something weird that's happened to us that has definitely made us feel more curious about the unknown. I don't know about Gigi personally, but I've had some insane experiences that have made me go, wait, what? You do that double take, like, did that really just happen? There's one that kind of just popped into my mind as we started recording. I was a kid, but I remember this so vividly, right?
Mhm.
When I used to live in an old village and we would take a drive into the city on the back roads, which was maybe, it was about a 12-mile drive in the country. And I remember on this particular night, it almost felt eerie because as we're driving, and I knew the road off by heart because we took those roads, a lot. There was a little cottage. Now, I'd never noticed this cottage before. Neither had my mum, but this cottage was sat behind a brick wall, like in between a cluster of trees, and in the window. Now it's broken down. It's old. It's a shell of a house with an old roof. But in the window, there's a candle that's lit. And I remember my mum saying, that's quite interesting. Maybe we should come back during the day and have a look because for me and her, we like to explore kind of older buildings in Scotland. And we took the drive back the next day in the morning. Gigi, that house was nowhere to be seen.
Oh
We
no.
never saw that house again.
Really? That's so
Yeah.
scary.
It was weird because we remember the house being just before the bridge, and
Mhm.
it's the only bridge that you drive over to get to the city. So it was in a quite a memorable spot. We're like, we
Mhm.
know we had to come here to see this little cottage, and it was not there. And my mom's like thinking to herself, well, saying out loud,
Mhm.
did we imagine this? You done that double take. And I remember that being quite a early experience for me that made me start to question um the weird and unknown
Mhm.
that happen around the world. So yeah, that stuck with me to this. So picture this. You have David Paulides. He is a veteran officer of 20 years who has been a street cop, detective in many different areas, even on the SWAT team. Once David retired, he turned to writing about Sasquatch sightings. One of the books he wrote was Tribal Bigfoot in 2017. Um,
Mm.
he was quite well known for that,
Mhm.
and on his quest to find more knowledge of said sightings, he went to a national park in North America. And because he was an author, he was escorted by workers there, um, park rangers, just to question people that worked on site about these Bigfoot sightings to see if he had any more for his next book. Well, David retired for the night, only to hear a knock on his hotel door during the night. To his surprise, it was one of the park rangers who was escorting him around the park.
Oh.
That's when it all began for David. That night, he sat down and the park ranger told him all about the mysterious disappearances in national parks around America. So, this new obsession for David spawned several books, a documentary, and a movie. I've personally uh, I've personally read several of these books. There's Missing 411, Western United States and Canada, Eastern United States and Canada, and North America and beyond. People who have disappeared in remote locations and beyond. The last
Oh.
one's quite a mouthful, I
Yeah.
must say, but these books are absolutely fascinating. I think the first time I found David, I don't know, do you know the Art Bell radio shows on YouTube? Or just in general? I think he records the shows in Las Vegas.
Mm.
Um, Art Bell, he does radio shows all about like the mysterious and the unknown, and he gets like people in who've wrote books about
Yeah. I love Art
aliens and
Bell.
all that. Yeah, so you know Art Bell. I
Uh-huh.
love him as well, and I've listened to a lot of his shows, but there was one that kind of popped out, and it was Art Bell and David Paulides discussing about missing people. And dude, when I tell you, I had shivers down my spine the entire time listening to this podcast. Like, I actually found the original podcast that I listened to probably about, gosh, 9 years ago now. I listened to it again to kind of like recap on some information, and honestly, years later, I had that very same chill down my spine. Like, it still
Mm.
had that same effect because not only is David Paulides like an excellent writer, and he gathers all the information. He's very informative, yet the way he writes, it's he can create that effect in you. But when he speaks about the books, it's yeah, it's even worse. I love it. But
It is.
so
I,
David, sorry.
I was thinking some of the roadblocks he encountered were like intense too. Trying to research, wasn't
Oh,
it?
oh, that's my next bit.
Oh,
He has had so much trouble, right? So
mm,
when David really started delving into missing people in national parks, he filed Freedom of Information Acts on missing people, kind of for like different parks. And I think it was a few weeks later, he gets a call from one of the park's attorneys saying, "Hey, why do you want this information?" Of course, you know, David's a retired 20-year-old, like a retired cop of 20 years. He knows the law and he
mm,
knows that that's an inappropriate question to ask. You're not allowed to ask that. And the attorney replies with, "Well, we're asking it and we don't actually keep track of missing people inside of the parks, right?" So
oh,
I can't fathom this. I think that's so insane.
it is.
Right? But
Yeah.
at the time, David was a published author, so he instead says, "Okay, I'm going to ask for an author's consent to gain this information."
Hmm.
Because he knew himself, like, there's no way the parks would not keep track of someone like this.
Hmm.
Well, he gets a call back a month later from the regional coordinator from Denver, and they told David, "You do not have enough of your books in libraries to qualify for the offers accept."
Mm, oh,
How many books do you need to be in a library to qualify? Like, surely just one's
42.
enough. 42. The answer to life.
Yes. Uh,
Well, you know what is interesting?
hmm.
David was sent a list of movies filmed in the national parks around America. So my question is, right, do they hold more value in that than missing people? Or do they not want that information to get out?
I don't know.
I mean, it really got the gears turning. Like, why is he finding having so much trouble getting this information?
Yeah.
You know,
It
there
doesn't
was
make any
so
sense.
it doesn't. He went through so many issues, and you know, like later down the line, which I think I mentioned later, with what I've read. Like, I do have a script here, listeners, but the way David gathers his information is actually through his listeners and readers who they themselves have filed Freedoms of Information Act and actually been given the information and then passed it on to him and his team. So really, without the readers, I don't think he'd have as many books as he has. He, called them later on and says, okay, how much is it going to cost to attain this information? Okay. Well, they
Mhm.
said for one park, it'd be $35,000. For all parks in
Oh,
the US, you'd have to pay for this information $1.4 million.
what?
And in addition to that, it costs $65 per hour to contract someone to go out to each location to gather information on missing people. I
That
thought,
kinda seems absurd almost.
it's almost like made up numbers, isn't it?
Yeah. Like, what?
It feels like they know this guy doesn't have the money, so let's
Mm.
put a number that's just unattainable for him.
Mhm.
So he was never given it. He had volunteers that go through archives, and he's quite lucky to have a team of people that have helped him because for like attaining this information. Now, this podcast, when I was listening to it, this was dated, I think it was 2015. So that was 9 years ago. And 9 years ago, through gathering this information, there was 1,600 missing people in North America alone in national parks. And he says, and that's without getting all the information. That's just from what they were given so far. And so David gets a map, he gets his pins, and he finds around America 52 clusters of missing people. So it's not even like one person's going missing in each park. It's
Right.
these clusters that are going missing in the same places. I, I think that's terrifying. Like if
Yes.
I personally knew that people were going missing at a certain spot in the woods, I'd be like, no, I'm okay.
Mm. Aren't some of them actually around caves too, like cave clusters?
There is cave clusters, but
Mm.
this is, this is going to get us. I'm going to dive a bit deeper because
Okay.
David does have prerequisites for picking these cases.
Oh, okay.
And so, what makes these disappearances so puzzling? So, for starters, he scratches off anything that may involve suspects,
Okay.
evidence of animal attacks or predation, mental illness, or voluntary disappearances. What makes
Mm.
these cases so abnormal is when a victim goes missing, and usually the park rangers will bring out like teams of people, AV or is it ATVs, and they'll bring out like packs of dogs, not only hounds but bloodhounds. There is never a scent of the victims or blood scents. Um, if the victims are found, they're usually found with missing clothes or missing shoes, or sometimes a missing shoe and some missing clothes. Depending on the geographical areas that are concerned, boulders and berries seem to be involved quite often with these disappearances.
Mm.
Um, Soon after the victim disappears, bad weather seems to be involved. If the victim is found, they're found near creeks or large bodies of water or areas that are like almost impossible to get to. The victims can never remember where or how they got there, and many doctors or say parents, because there is a lot of young kids that end up going missing and turn up later in ridiculous places,
Mm.
say that they suffer from a low grade fever, which these are the factors that David puts in when choosing these cases. Um, there's a lot of people as well that are intellectually different. Like a lot of the time, there's like mathematicians, physicists, doctors that go missing. But then on the other end, you have people like that have autism or dementia. And there are people in the middle ground intellectually who disappear, but the numbers are a lot greater for the higher and lower spectrum. Um, and then The last one that I find the most intriguing is if the victims are found unalive, then examiners never find the cause of their unalive and rule it, a natural death. So it's like the examiners can never pinpoint why this person passed away. And that's the one that kind of like makes the heckles of Manic really just stick up in the place.
Mhm. It does. I mean, it's like usually when someone passes, there's like, oh, okay, so they had a heart attack, or you can tell like this, or it was obviously exposure.
Yeah. No, they just put it down to a natural death and move
Hmm.
on. So then, while David's doing his research, there's been many questions arisen from listeners and readers alike. And a lot of them speculate or go to that comfort place of like logic. Is this a serial killer or a group of serial killers? Can you imagine Gigi trying to kidnap somebody on an open trail?
No, no.
Let's say I mean, I'm hoping you wouldn't actually do it, but
Yeah, I mean,
imagine you are, right, and
mhm,
you're about to kidnap somebody. They're 5'10", weigh maybe 180 pounds.
mhm.
Realistically, how far are you going to get with that person?
Right. I mean, it's like you've got to either have like an outpost for yourself out there where you know where you're going to take them, or you're just
But then, wouldn't the hounds catch a scent trail?
probably, yeah. I mean, there would be something you would think.
Yeah, and then David says, like, I'm not too familiar with gun laws, but I
Hmm.
know in Colorado it's an open carry.
Hmm.
And he jokingly said himself, like, if somebody tried to kidnap you and you're open carry, it's going to end in a gunfight, which brings us back to the bloodhounds.
Hmm.
There would be a trail of blood leading to the victims.
Hmm.
Um, so let's actually delve into it. Let me bring you to our first case, Gigi. This
Okay.
is let's go back a few years. It's 2015, and we're in the Grand Canyon National Park. There's a group of tourists going down a river with a well established tour company. They're floating down Colorado, and I think they're about 4 or 5 days into their adventure when they stop at a shallow creek. It's a spot that the tour boat always stops at because just a couple of 100 yards up, there's like a little pool of water with a bunch of rocks that people can jump off.
Hmm.
It's this really beautiful enclosed space um, that you can just kind of blow some steam off and have fun and just float about in the water. Well, Morgenheimer is an absolutely stellar kid. He's one of the tour guides. Also, he's in his first year at the University of Wyoming, and he's just known to be this really happy-go-lucky guy. And on June 2nd, 2015, they're taking a group out, and again, they're on their 4 or 5 day stretch when they stop at this spot to unwind and have fun. Now, as they're walking back, he is wearing his life preserver, carrying a water bottle, and the people said that the creek was so small that you could wade across it without even having it come up to your waist. So, to make a long story short, Morgan never returns. He was on the back of the line of people, kind of herding them back to the boat with the other tour guide at the front, and he just vanishes.
Hmm.
That's it. He's gone. Someone from the tourist company actually contacted David and said they were baffled, absolutely baffled as to what could have happened to him, and it made absolutely no sense that he could disappear in this little cove. Um, well, as soon as they noticed he was gone and they couldn't find him, they used their satellite phone to call for help. And late that night, the National Park Service searched for a few days and they just never found anything. To this day, he's never been found. We
That's so
know
sad. I can't imagine like my loved one being missing and it just no trace, like no resolution whatsoever.
there's nothing. There's no trace of him. His parents gave the police his son's DNA for the
Mhm.
database of missing people in case like a John Doe ever turns up, or bones
Mhm.
turn up, a piece of cloven blood, something. But nothing has ever turned up. Morgenheimer vanished into thin air.
Oh my
And
gosh.
this is the case for a lot, if not all the stories in these books. There was a well-renowned journalist, Roger March, who wrote an article after reading one of David's books for the Huffington Post titled "Don't Be Last in Line."
Mm.
Because many of the stories in the book, it involves people being like last in line or first in line. And even with the ones that are first in line, they get out of sight momentarily and they're just gone. They vanish from the face of the earth.
Wow.
I'm just taking a drink, that's a lot.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Is this okay so far?
Oh, it's good. It's really good.
Okay. And that brings me to our next story.
Mhm.
So we've got June 9th and it's 2015 and we're at the Shera Kahua.
Mhm.
I had to kind of like write that out phonetically because I wasn't sure how to say it. But we're at the Shera National Monument, which is in jurisdiction to the National Park Service. So we have a 44-year-old woman named Janet Casterson who has she has the mental capacity of a 5-year-old.
Oh.
Yeah, it's going back to what I mentioned before about the last story. We had this super bright, intelligent kid who just disappeared, and then we have Janet Casterson that does have, you know, mental, what's it, mental capacity. How the fuck do I word that? Cut this out.
Okay, I will.
Okay, hold on. And then we have Janet, who's on the other side of the spectrum, where we have a mental capacity of 5-year-old. But she's traveling around with her dad, who is a physician, and her mother too. And they're traveling around in their camper van. They're visiting national parks and places like this monument here. And so they stop at the monument, and the girl gets out with her mother to use one of the public toilets that are there. So she's followed into the toilet with her mother while her father stays in the van. And this van, it is parked very, very close to the toilets. It's
Mhm.
maybe a 20 feet walk. It's not that far. Janet was the first to leave the restroom and she was soon followed by her mother. But when her mother returns to the camper van and sees that only her husband's there, they immediately start, searching for Janet.
Mhm.
She's gone. In the span of like maybe 10 seconds from her leaving the bathroom to then her mother following, she's gone.
Mm.
They call out for Janet, they don't hear anything, they'll look around the area. It's not like it's an expansive area. It's not like there's a lot of places they could look. But
Mhm.
once they realized they were out of their depth, they called the National Park Service, and the search starts. They bring out a team of people, they bring out the hounds, and she was never found. Janet was never found. And
Mm.
I think what's interesting about, you know, when we're speaking of the clusters of the missing people,
Mhm.
in the 1980s, at the exact same spot, a national park ranger on duty disappeared at that same spot.
Oh no.
Now,
A
you
park.
have somebody, yeah, a park ranger. This is
Mhm.
this is a survivalist. This is somebody who knows what they're doing and would,
Mhm.
it's not a person who would easily get lost.
Mhm.
And I think they would be far more equipped than Janet to say if they did get lost to survive. But again, they brought in the teams, the bloodhounds, the canines, and he was never found. He was never found. And there was his wife, who, I think it would maybe 1 or 2 years later, she realizes her husband isn't coming back. He's just disappeared. So, she contacts NPS, National Park Service, and says, I want his pension. I think that's something that a wife is entitled to if a
Mhm.
husband dies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sh- She had to fight tooth and nail to get that pension from them because the NPS said his disappearance was voluntary.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's insane. It's
Ugh.
it's almost like the NPS are not allowed to say, yeah, he disappeared. Yeah,
Mhm.
we can't find him. Yeah, it wasn't involuntary. I find it also bizarre the way they act around these disappearances.
Me too. Hold on just a
So let's go a little bit further back.
okay.
Okay, maybe a bit further back. There was a story in the 1800s, right, where a girl disappeared in Lake Michigan, and her dad and like a family friend went looking for her. And as they're like kind of walking through the wooded area of the lake, they see something like jump off a log into the water, and they never really thought anything of it. Like kind of think, oh well, maybe it was like an animal or something like that. But as they rounded the corner, they found a girl. Now she had been missing for a few days, but when they found her, she looked fine. She was like a really small girl. She didn't really have a grasp on language just yet because of
Mhm.
how young she was. So the father was like, are you okay? Are you hungry? Like, where have you been? And she says, Wolf fed me berries. And the
Oh.
father's like, okay, where's your hat and where's your shoes? Wolf ate it. Wolf ate them. And that was kind of like the only response that they got from her is, that this wolf ate it. And it's one of those fascinating stories, but it's kind of like hard to take it literally because of the literary ability of the small child. So, we don't really know what she had been explaining, but there's actually a lot of accounts in David's books where kids talk about a quote unquote wolf or hairy beast or hairy man that, took them, carried them off. Like, I searched high and low for this case, right? And so I couldn't find it. So I don't have all the facts, but I know this story in particular stuck with me because there was a particular case I remembered where there was a little kid who was with their mother and they're walking through, the park. And, the mum turns her head for like not even 10 seconds. She turns around, kid is gone. It's one of those last in line moments, she's searching around and maybe he's hiding behind like some trees or a
Yeah,
boulder
like maybe
or
he wandered
whatever.
off. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how far could he wander in those
Mhm.
10 seconds, you know?
Mhm.
But so she can't find him. She's panicking. They call the National Park Service. They get their rangers in, their hounds. This child was found, I believe it was 9 miles out, up a mountain.
Oh no. That's
Almost. But okay, that's weird, right? This kid, quote unquote, walked 9 miles and then decided, I'm going to climb a mountain, you know?
I mean that's a lot for a little kid. And speaking as someone who hikes a lot, 9 miles is almost a day's worth of hiking. Like,
Exactly. It's a long time. And when the kid was found, his clothes were intact, his shoes was missing. But, if you think, okay, your shoes are missing, you've walked 9 miles, how untouched are your feet actually going to be? You're
they're
probably going to have,
bound to have, especially as like if it's a kid who grew up in America, then they probably had shoes most of their life, so their feet are tender. And you're talking and
exactly.
walking in the woods with like brambles, random
And
thorns, roots, rocks. I mean, those feet are gonna get cut, hurt, bruised.
nope. his feet were absolutely fine, and that is quite a
Mm.
common factor in cases. Like, if victims are found, their shoes tend to be missing, but their feet are entirely fine. And this kid didn't exactly say he was taken by like a hairy beast man or wolf, but he did tell the rangers, who it was lucky a ranger went out and decided to check this mountain, and the kid wasn't hungry. He was a little scared, but he was not hungry and he was clean. So I always question
That's
9 miles
weirder.
up a mountain
Mhm.
unscathed. How I can't I can't quite wrap that around my head.
Yeah. It's like somebody
Uh,
would have had to lift him up and carry him that way for him to not be dirty.
exactly. So that is probably one of the more chilling factors that I
Mhm.
find in most of the cases that David's uncovered. There was one I was kind of reading briefly. I wasn't initially going to put it in a script, but as I was reading it, I thought, okay, this
Mhm.
case just gets a little weirder and weirder. So Corey Kelly, missing 10/16/06. Um, so Jim and Corey are really good friends, right? They're
Mhm.
buddies that decided to go grouse hunting in northern Minnesota. Kelly Kelly made the trip from his home in Crooktown, Minnesota to the Red Lake State Wildlife Management Area. Jim joined him at the campsite mid-afternoon on October 16th. So the men started to set up their camp when Jim realized, like, oh, well, hey, we need gas. So he decided, I'm going to go into town to the Fort town and get some gas. And Corey decided to stay behind with Jim's dog.
Mm.
So Jim stated that he last saw Corey 200 yards south of the camp with his shotgun, and he was headed out to shoot grouse.
Okay.
So Jim left the campsite at 5:30 p.m. and returned at 7 p.m. As he arrived back to the campsite to find evidence that Corey had been collecting firewood. So, after Jim left, it was evident he'd been kind of pottering around the campsite, prepping it for his return so they could have a fire. But, you know, Corey was nowhere to be found. It was getting late in the afternoon and close to dark, so Jim's getting a bit panicked, a bit nervous, and he also realized, hey, my dog Sammy's gone as well. The both of them were missing. It wasn't just Corey.
Ooh,
So,
that's not good.
however, Jim wasn't too panicked because he knew Corey had his shotgun on him. Okay, so he knew he was out there how like trying to find grouse. So, even if he was lost, he had the means to protect himself from wildlife at least.
Mhm.
So darkness falls, it's engulfed the entire campsite, and Jim decided, okay, I'm gonna honk the horn and flash the lights and see if that'll help Corey get home. Because maybe, he's lost. And this would help him. But as the night progresses, Jim realizes, okay, he's not returning. Maybe set up camp somewhere else. I'm going to go to sleep, wake up, and if he's not returned, I'm going to go search for my friend. And unfortunately, when Jim woke up, his friend still wasn't there. So he took a 2 mile walk out from the campsite in an effort to find him. And there was no evidence that Corey had even been on the trip with him. Jim eventually flagged down two passing people from the campsite, explained to a camper was missing and asked them to notify law enforcement. Uh, Corey had been visiting this exact area of the Red Lake Wilderness since he was a child. Like, this wasn't his first visit. It was the first visit for Jim, but Corey was expert here. He knew, that area like the back of his hand. So if anybody should have been lost, it should have been Jim. So searchers decided to comb the area. They brought out the ATVs, they brought out the dogs. But that particular area that they camped in, there was lots of tall grass, lots of water, swamps, bogs, and for almost 2 weeks, searchers found nothing. on Wednesday, October 25th, two hunters, 9 miles from the Jim and Corey campsite, found the dog. They found Sammy. You know, this is
Oh,
weeks
thank
later.
God for
They
that.
found I know, but they found the dog. He was a little dehydrated. He was a little hungry, but he was generally in good condition, and that kind of falls back to what we were talking about earlier, where if people are found or pets, they're generally okay. It's as if nothing's happened. They're just, hey, what's up? um. So they found the dog, and on Saturday, October 28th, searchers found Corey Kelly's cigarettes in his lighter. On October 29th, trackers from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension found Corey's overalls, socks, and hooded sweatshirt 14 miles from the original campsite. So they found his clothes, they found the dog, but no Corey. On October 30th, Beltrami County Emergency Management Coordinator Beryl Wernberg stated that weather had hindered the search and that they were terminating the efforts for winter, And on in mid-November, the search for Corey Kelly started again. So I think not for winter, but the weather was bad in October, so they kind of
Yeah.
had to halt that a bit. But mid-November, the search for Corey began again. The best search dogs in Minnesota were brought to the scene, and after 13 more days, were unable to locate Corey. On November 23rd, the search for Corey Kelly was terminated for the winter. And then we kind of move on to April. So this has been a few months now. And so on April 28th, the search for Corey Kelly resumed, with the Sheriff's Department flying over the area where Corey's clothes and other personal belongings were found. North of the Rapid River, a walking bridge off of Rapid River Road near the Moose River Road, so many roads, the air team spotted a body. So unfortunately, we did find Corey, but he had died. What is very weird about this? Now, when Corey was airlifted to the coroners, they could not find the cause of death. It was another natural death. No, sorry, they put it down to hypothermia. What's weird is they also stated that Corey died on the first night that he was lost. So Corey left the camp,
Mhm.
walked 14 miles out, stripped all his clothing, his gun, his lighter, which he could have used to make a fire,
Mhm.
and walked miles more and died. So what I
That's
find
weird.
weird about this is it's weird, right?
Yeah, it's super
Okay,
weird.
the first thing is now
Uh-huh.
a lot of hikers know, if you take your dog
Mhm.
and there's a potential to suffer from hypothermia, the dog's the best thing to cuddle up to because
Yeah.
they generate so much warmth that they would probably help keep you survive.
They definitely
And
would. And that's kind of like the same thing if you're with another person. Body heat in general can, really raise up your temperature and potentially allow you to live. So, yeah, you'd want to stick close to your dog.
yeah, and not only that, he was a smoker, so he
Mm,
had a lighter.
yeah.
And he was, he was a camper. He
Hmm.
loved to hike and camp. This man knew how to make a fire. He had a gun that he
Hmm.
could have shot off at any time, and you would hear that shotgun miles
Yeah,
off. You know, uh, it's just such a bizarre case, and
it is.
if you read through the books, they just get weirder and weirder. I think I'm going to delve
Hmm.
into my childhood a little bit before
Oh,
we wrap
okay.
up this segment.
Hmm.
Honestly, I think the reason it would scare me so much is I watched The Blair Witch as a kid, right?
Oh.
So
Hmm.
let me set the scene for some new listeners because I have mentioned this on our Cold Dead Heart podcast.
Hmm.
So I'm maybe 7 or 8 years old, and I'm laying in bed. My grandma's just put down hot cocoa next to me and said our
Aw.
good night. She's put on the TV, and this is kind of, I've shown Mage a little bit, but this is back in the day where you only had 5 channels to choose
Mhm.
from, right? I put on Channel 4 because usually at the weekend they'd play movies. And, the only light that could be seen is from the tiny portable TV. And I'm lying there sipping on my cocoa when I see a documentary about this creepy witch. And I'm like, this is amazing. They're actually doing a
Mhm.
documentary about witches and ghosts and all that. I was
Oh.
so enthralled by this movie, but terrified that they released a show, where people died. Because hand on heart, by the time the ending arrived, I was truly terrified because Channel 4 didn't even have the audacity to play the credits. So I thought it was real. I thought the Blair Witch was real. So ever since then, I've had a real intense fear of the woods. Like, you will not find me stepping foot out there on my own at night. But then I think that's what really that's I think that's why what David is researching really strikes a chord of fear in my heart, because this is reality. We have people disappearing in mass clusters around, not even Canada and North America and South America, all over the world. And I think it's like the fact that David is having so many issues with the government trying to attain this information of what's going on, makes it even scarier, because it's like, what are you guys hiding? Why will you not just give up the information and admit that there's something weird going on? So yeah, that I love the Missing 411 books. I've read most of them. I generally think what he's doing is a really good cause. And yeah, if you're interested in being terrified, I think the listeners, you guys, should definitely check out his books, or at least his interviews with Art Bell on YouTube.
I've checked out the Art Bell stuff on YouTube before, and it is awesome for sure. And now, to kind of go along the same veins of the wooded areas, I'd like to discuss some of the folklore and legends of the Appalachian Mountains, just to get us started. We'll dip like a toe in. The Appalachians, with their rolling hills and dense forests, have long been cradle for stories that spark imagination, from ghostly apparitions and cryptid sightings to witchcraft and ancient legends. These mountains are a treasure trove of folklore that I'm lucky to call home. All right, so let's start with some of the most spine tingling ghost stories. And have you heard about the Brown Mountain Lights? So, in
Uh, oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I've heard briefly, but I'm not too
Okay.
aware of it.
So, in North Carolina, there are lights on a outcropping, and some people say that they're long lost spirits. Some say that it's like a natural gas emission that's catching the light. Some people say it's aliens. Um, One of the more recent theories are that there's some kind of glass manufacturing nearby, and the particulates have settled there on that
Oh,
outcropping so that it's reflective. I am down with that explanation. That sounds reasonable, except for the fact that the lights there date back centuries, and the
yeah.
manufacturing is within the last 100 years. So that doesn't explain the stories before it existed.
Uh-huh.
Um, then there's another of the Greenbrier ghost in West Virginia. Zona Hester Shue reappeared after her death to accuse her husband of the murder. And it is a chilling reminder that some mysteries can refuse to stay buried. And that's actually kind of a common theme in the mountains of women returning for revenge or to accuse. It's kind of interesting. But ghosts are not the only inhabitants of these mountains. The Appalachians are a hotbed of cryptic sightings from Bigfoot to Mothman to the Flatwoods Monster. And then let's not forget sightings of the Wampus Cat, which is a creature from Cherokee legend that's said to be half woman, half beast that prowls the mountains. Mothman is in West Virginia, which is a winged humanoid with glowing red eyes, who sightings coincide with disasters, including the 1960s collapse of Silver Bridge, where,
Oh,
yeah, people plummeted to their death in the icy waters.
so wait, that was real?
Yeah.
Because there's the Mothman
Mhm.
prophecies. I
Yeah,
watched that. I
yeah.
didn't realize that was based on a true story.
It is. It is.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
Wow. Okay.
yeah, it's in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and there's Mothman sightings actually all over that continue to this day, and uh,
Wow.
it's like a bad omen. So usually people see him or it, and then something happens, and one of the biggest ones was the bridge collapse.
The bridge. Oh
Hmm.
gosh. Okay. Well, I don't think I'm going to come visit you because it sounds also creepy.
Yeah,
I
it
come for
is.
a visit and then I
Mhm.
see Mothman. I'm like, oh God, just my luck.
Yeah, and if you go to Point Pleasant, there's actually an annual festival with all Mothman stuff, and there's a Mothman
Wow.
museum and a statue. So,
Okay, that sounds cool. I
mhm,
like that.
yeah, it's super
It,
cool.
it sounds cool, but I'd still be scared to visit.
Yeah, I mean, West Virginia's got the spookies for sure.
So it
Um,
seems. Wow.
yeah. So in with all the spookies, the Appalachians are also steeped in tales of witchcraft and supernatural practices. Granny magic or folk magic, as it is commonly referred to. It's a
Yeah.
blend of European practices, African traditions, Native traditions, which is like Native American traditions that people sort of like all smushed together to call like granny witchcraft. And
Right.
it's like herbs, charms, spells, and just like a really rich tapestry of folk magic.
Uh-huh.
One of the things that was kind of surprising is that when you talk about like hex signs, you would think that that's like a curse on somebody, but hex symbols or hex sigils are actually protection magic that people would commonly place, especially in the more like um, Dutch or German, I guess, areas of settlement. So, like
Yeah.
more like in Pennsylvania, um, that they would use those on barns and their homes to like keep evil away.
Oh, okay. So maybe Virginia was more accepting of witchcraft, say,
Mhm.
than Salem. Like they kind of
Mhm.
embraced the better side of it to help protect them.
Well, yeah, I think it's
That's
almost like the pioneer aspect a little bit because I don't think they would have
yeah.
allowed witchcraft necessarily,
Uh-huh.
but I think it was like because of this sort of pioneer spirit and you had to forage and get all these medicinal herbs together because there probably wasn't
Yeah.
a doctor, that it was more like accepted, especially if you had it under the veil of like Christianity. So
Oh,
it's
this is
not
true.
necessarily that they were practicing a different religion. They were still operating under the confines of like a Christian scope, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
they just absorbed all these other sort of cultural things around them.
Uh-huh.
Um which is really cool and I'd love to dive kind of more into maybe in later episodes too. Um
Oh, for witchcraft?
yeah.
Oh, I mean, I have studied up so much lore and about witchcraft in
Mhm.
Scotland. It's like there's a
That'd be so
galore of
cool.
it. So yeah, we're definitely gonna do that for future episodes. Hell
Okay,
yeah.
awesome. So, the natural beauty of the Appalachians is also a source of mystical stories. The Great Smoky Mountains, often enveloped in fog, are said to be home to ancient spirits. The Devil's Courthouse, which is a rock outcropping in North Carolina, um, is rumored to host the devil himself. And the
Oof.
caves below are said to house giants. which
A
is interesting.
giant?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
There's actually
I
lots
mean,
of giant stories in North America, surprisingly. I associate giant stories more with like the Mediterranean era. I don't know. Maybe because of just growing up with like Greek stories of Cyclops and those giants and the Titans.
yeah.
But yeah, North America has its fair share, and especially in the Appalachian Mountains, all of the
Um,
different caves have different entities associated with them.
that's quite interesting. I mean, you
Hmm.
see quite a lot on TikTok and YouTube, and people who film like mountains around America and that, and they see like this rock, this giant rock, and it
Hmm.
almost looks like a giant store.
Hmm.
You know, like a doorway into a cave. So that's quite interesting that I mean, gosh, it sounds like the Appalachian Mountains have a little bit of everything though.
They do. They really do. And they're beautiful and they're breathtaking. And,
Yeah.
it's interesting just how much like lore that there really is. I love it. I love it.
So what would be your favorite story about the Appalachian Mountains?
I
Do you
don't
have a particular favorite?
I don't think I have necessarily like a favorite story, but I do love the cryptids. I think it's interesting to learn about all the different creatures. There's just so many. For instance, the Flatwoods monster is said to be like an alien that
Okay.
tons of people saw at the time in the 50s, and um it had, let's see, it had some sort of like odd robotics to how it was described. Like it had a helmet and mechanical hands and arms, and everywhere that
Oh.
it landed, it actually released like a noxious gas that they couldn't identify, but it would make people sick. Like they developed respiratory symptoms and fevers. And a dog that was nearby lived, but was also sick. Um, which I'm like, well, if it was an alien, did it like release some of its atmosphere? And whoopsie doodles, people got sick.
Whoopsie doodles.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. I think that was that an official news report?
Yes. Yeah. That's technical terms.
Yes.
But I don't know, I always thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And it had like repeated appearances, and then it was kind of squashed. Like you had some Men in Black stuff after that. But yeah, I love the cryptids a lot. I also like the sort of folk magic type stuff. There's the Bell
Yeah.
Witch. I don't know if you've heard of the Bell Witch.
I have not. Who is the Bill Witch?
Okay, so they don't know, but basically the story is that this guy named Bell uprooted his family and moved to a new area and then started getting tormented by an
Mhm.
entity that they called the Bell Witch, or they actually named it Kate because he had a neighbor he didn't get along with, so he started calling it Kate, which when the neighbor found out got super pissed. She was like, "What the heck?
Oh.
Why?" Um, but what's interesting is that on the coroner's report for, I believe it's John Bell, um, but for his death, it said death by witchcraft.
No way.
Yeah,
Wow. Imagine having that in your tombstone, death by witchcraft.
yeah,
It's almost badass.
it is. It is. So it's kind of cool. I mean, there's all sorts of strange legends and stories and things like that that are just fascinating and really interesting all over. I mean, we could almost do deep dives into each segment of it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, how large is it again? There must be just about everything
Well, so
in
it
the mountain.
spans the continental United States from Georgia to Maine. So
Mhm.
that's like 13 states. West Virginia is the only one that's totally in the Appalachian Mountains. The rest of the states
Mhm.
just have like pieces of it in foothills and things like that.
Oh,
So that's kind of cool.
but it's just right in your back garden, isn't it?
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
right there.
exactly.
Oh gosh. I think I honestly, ah,
But you know, as
I don't.
spooky as they are, I just have to say this: as spooky as
Mhm.
they are incredibly beautiful,
Yeah,
um, and very peaceful. And I just think they're home.
home for you.
Hmm.
Yeah, of course. Home for you, terrifying nightmare for me.
You're welcome. Yes.
Like my worst nightmare.
Hmm.
We've got like a little plot of woods in the back, and sometimes
Hmm.
um I try not go out at night time, but sometimes the dog wants out, and I'm like, okay, I'll walk around the edge of it, like on the other side of the fence. And there's been times where I'm like, come on, Jasper, just brave it, go in,
Hmm.
and I'll get to the edge. And I'm like, nope, I can't do it, man. And there's no lore. Like I always check for lore wherever I move,
Hmm.
and there's no lore there. It seems relatively safe, but no, Blair Witch ruined it for me.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't see that until later. Although I did have my fair share of like horror movies that take place in the woods. I think it's a
Mhm.
popular sort of primal fear, right?
Yeah,
Because when you
I
think
think.
about the woods, it's like that's where you go to get banished if you were in a tribe.
Yeah.
Like the woods hold so many things. I don't know how true this is, but I thought I would just we could wrap up with this little story. I always thought it was cute. But
Mhm.
you know how we call a bear, right?
Yeah.
So the story I heard from like some sort of linguist article years and years ago is that we don't actually know what the original word for bear was because every time it was alluded to in like ancient scrolls and writings and things like that and oral
Mhm.
history, they would call it a bear because they didn't want to say its real name in fear that it would conjure a bear. So like
Oh,
we don't know what
okay.
people like in Europe actually called it way, way back in the day. It's just bear.
Bear.
Hmm.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I was like, that's kind of cool.
Imagine you're just kind of like yabbering yourself, just
Hmm.
making up words, and you see like cold flu, and suddenly a bear appears, and you're like, what's going on?
Hmm. Well, it's kind of
Ah,
that's kind of cool to me too because it just shows how connected we are kind of as people because throughout the world in all sorts of different cultures there is this idea that you don't want to name something its actual name
mhm.
because you don't want to call it forward. Like here we have
Yeah,
like the Wendigo or the Skinwalkers. You don't want to say that because you don't want to conjure them to you. Um,
yeah.
and there it's like that all over the place.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess what I find interesting, with you saying skinwalkers and Wendigo and stuff,
Mhm.
is that you know, we have this, but all over the world, but there's just different names for it, you
Mhm.
know? We have our own skinwalkers, our own wendigos that go by different names, and
Yeah, shapeshifters, right?
yeah, and there's, I think I can't remember the quote, and I can't remember who said it, but it was something like, when they first wrote Dracula and books such as that, with the monsters with the fangs, and
Mhm.
uh, where did it come from?
Right.
We're inventive to a point, but
Mhm.
we invent and we come up and we conjure from what's around us. And it kind of, we get amalgamation of new things, and then we get technology and whatnot. But where did those ideas come from
Mhm.
originally? I always find that quite fascinating.
Yeah, me too. I
Um,
love it. It's like why did we
yeah,
think of this specific thing? And why does this specific thing repeat so many times all over the world?
exactly. I
Mhm.
like to try and keep one foot on the ground, while I'm reaching for the sky. But I don't know. I feel like a lot of these stories, because they're so familiar around the world, and because there's so many accounts, it's hard not to say, well, this how can this not be true? How can this not be real, you know?
Well,
So
it's one of those things is like we can dismiss it so easily in the comfort of our like air conditioned homes
yes.
with, like all of our modern conveniences. But that doesn't mean that the hidden world doesn't coexist at the same time. And
Exactly.
that's what I like. That's what I want to get into and investigate. All right.
We we good?
Yeah.
And that'll be moving on in the next segment, which
Uh-huh.
is okay. I feel like I went through
And join us every Friday for these spooky sessions where we delve into mysteries,